All right, folks. Do you what American League team is doing it right? The Detroit Tigers.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. I'll tell you why I'm laughing in a second. Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is almost here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and on the Instagrams. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on the Instagrams, but the best way to get a hold of me is just post something right here on the YouTubes and on the comments below. And as you can see, I'm casting a spell. I was giggling because when the logo with my new theme music was going on, I let out a gigantic burp, and the burp ended just as we came back. So I figured I hit the post on that. I have to say I miss my old theme song, but what are you going to do? It ain't up to me. Hey, there's some news today, and people have criticized the podcast of late for being too Dodger centric. And in fact, I have a really terrific listener who is Kobe Life, LYFE, has not only been reprimanding me for talking about the Dodgers too much, especially when the Dodgers were the only team making any news, but apparently he has like a chart like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, just sort of keeping track of all the numbers of the show and the percentage of times I talked about the Los Angeles Dodgers. Well, guess what? Today I'm going to talk about someone who's leaving the Dodgers. Jack Flaherty. Jack Flaherty is one of the free agents who were remaining, who are now coming off the board. Pitchers and catchers reporting very, very soon. So some of the players who are still available come, via free agency, who had images of multi-year deals dancing in their head, are going to have to start signing with some teams. Now, I've made the point that there are a couple players who have qualifying offers attached to them. If you're a team like, I'm going to say Cleveland, and you have one of the deepest farm systems in baseball, if you're a team like Baltimore and you have one of the deepest farm systems in baseball, and you're a 90-some-odd win team who has a chance to win the pennant, signing a pitcher like Nick Pivetta could go a long way. If it costs you a pick, so what? You already have a deep system, and you have a chance to win right now. Winning right now should be the key, as I said before, to every single American League team that does not play in Chicago should be looking at the 2025 season as a chance to win the pennant. As of this recording, the New York Yankees, the defending American League champions, are probably the best team, but they just lost Juan Soto. They added some players who could be very good or who could flop. They added some good, they're a good team, but they're not invincible. This is not a super team. Cleveland's not a super team. Boston's not a super team. Houston is having players taken away from them. I've made this point that with the American League wide open, if you say, if you answer these two questions, do I run an American League team? If the answer is yes, then ask yourself, is that American League team the Chicago White Sox? If the answer to that is no, then you have to go for it. Yeah, the A's have a shot. Yeah, the Angels have a shot. The Rangers right now are the team lurking in the weeds, not just because of the whole every other thing with Bruce Bochy, but if DeGrom comes back and gives them even 2/3 of a season, and some of the players are expecting just play to the level you're expecting, they could win 89 to 90 games, and the Astros are taking a step back. No one knows what the hell Seattle's doing, although I'll get to the fact that I think they're doing one thing kind of smart. I've made this point over and over again. Acquire major leaguers. Fill your holes with major league players and take your best shot, which brings us back to the Detroit Tigers. And the Detroit Tigers, who last year stunned everybody, including your pal Sully, when they looked like they were dead from the neck up. When you take a look at where they were, I mean, they were on July 4th, they were 9 games under 500. 9 games under 500 on the 4th of July. They got whumped by Minnesota. And I think we all know how painful that can be. And they were a seller. At that point, only the Rangers, the Angels, the A's, and the White Sox were worse than the Detroit Tigers on the 4th of July. After that date, they had the second best record in baseball, second only to the San Diego Padres. Lest we forget how great the Padres were in the second half of the season. I digress. The Tigers came out, went on an absolute rampage, stunned the living snot out of everyone, including the good people of Minnesota. And they had a 17-8 September and found themselves in the playoffs, where they eliminated the Houston Astros and came this close to beating Cleveland. If Tarek Skubal had a good game in Game 5, the Cy Young Award winner, they would have gone to the League Championship Series. Now, they probably would have had their butts handed to them by the New York Yankees, because the Yankees were a better team than Detroit last year. But then again, there's always that, hey, it's anyone's guess. Now, I mentioned the fact that there were 9 games under 500 on the 4th of July. The Tigers, even though they made the playoffs, even though they nearly made it to the ALCS, were sellers at the trade deadline. And on the 30th of July, they traded Jack Flaherty to Los Angeles for Trey Sweeney and a minor league outfielder by the name of Theron Liranzo. Okay, I'm sorry I mispronounced his name. By the way, that minor league outfielder went to their single A team and hit the living snot out of the ball. The 20-year-old in his 26 games in West Michigan had an OPS over 1,000 and hit 5 home runs in 26 games and looked pretty darn good. But I digress. The other player they got in the deal was Trey Sweeney, a top shortstop prospect with first the Yankees and the Dodgers. Never saw a major league game with those two teams, but wound up being the starting shortstop for the Tigers in the division series and made some spectacular defensive plays. Yes, in that deal, they got a starting shortstop, a 24-year-old starting shortstop with playoff experience. And the entire team, the entire Detroit team, got some playoff experience and got a little, had the great feeling of eliminating Houston and played that heartbreaking series against Cleveland. And then the Tarek Skubal of the world and the Reese Olsons of the world got to play meaningful games, as did the Colt Keats of the world and Spencer Torkelson's of the world and the Riley Greens of the world. It's an incredibly young team. Got to have all sorts of playoff experience and playing meaningful games. And they play in the Central. And the Central is, they brought 3 teams to the playoffs last year, but who's the super team there? The Cleveland Guardians look darn good. They're a 90-win team. And if their ownership brought them to the middle of the pack in terms of their payroll, they'd probably be a legit pennant contender. But there is Detroit. Jack Flaherty went to Los Angeles, picked up a World Series ring for his troubles, and went off to free agency. And there were lots of Tiger fans saying, oh, we can sign him back. That never works. It's a great idea. Like, we'll trade him at the trade deadline and then reacquire him as a free agent. That almost never happens. I can remember that happened with the A's trading away Ricky Henderson down the stretch in 93 and then reacquiring him for 94. I remember the Cleveland trading Kenny Lofton to the Atlanta Braves and then re-signing him when he was a free agent. Aroldis Chapman, the Yankees traded Chapman to the Cubs. Chapman did everything in his power to hand the World Series to Cleveland, and then the Yankees re-signed him, where he continued to blow huge games year in and year out for the Yankees. And so the idea of Flaherty, those are the three I could think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there's another one somewhere. But it looked like, that's a pipe dream. It's probably not going to happen. But lo and behold, it did. Lo and behold, the Tigers brought him back. The Tigers brought him back. And with that, they have done a tremendous job of increasing the depth in their starting staff. And with some of the other moves they're making, doing the exact thing I was saying all the American League teams should do, which is, hey, you don't have to sign players to $500 million contracts to go for it. You just have to go for it. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams. One's from Kansas City. One's from Philadelphia. You got endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown call in the MVP or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. And the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's just icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. Okay, so think about what they've done. They signed Jack Flaherty, who was a terrific pitcher with St. Louis in the 2010s, stumbled on some hard times, especially with his time with Baltimore, but refound his footing with Detroit. Now, they signed him to a 2-year deal and one that has a player out option after one. So it's not exactly a deal that's going to break the bank, okay? It's not exactly one. It's the classic, there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal, and there's, a 2-year deal is fine. By the way, my good friend Marcel in Switzerland pointed out that it was Keith Law who had the line, there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. Okay, so now you have a major league pitcher and a good one in the rotation. You also have Terrence Skubal, who, unless you forgot, just won the American League Cy Young Award. Now, they also have Reese Olson. Reese Olson was on the team that made it as a wild card team last year, and you have him, and you put him in the rotation. Basically, you're asking him to move down a spot in the rotation, and he's 24 years old and looked pretty darn good in his 24 starts. So right there, you have a top three of Skubal, Flaherty, and Olson, and Flaherty has had some success there. All right, then they acquired Alex Cobb. Now, is Alex Cobb the second coming of Walter Johnson? Of course he's not. He only pitched in a handful of games last year. But this was someone who was an all-star as recently as 2023. I seem to be saying that a lot. There's a lot of players who were all-stars in 2023 who are reclamation projects in 2025. But you're not asking Alex Cobb to be an ace. You're asking to be a fourth or fifth starter. Then you have Kenta Maeda is still cashing the check. And then you have Casey Mize. Casey Mize is still floating around there. Remember Casey Mize, the number 1 overall pick in the draft in 2018 out of Auburn? Well, he's 27 years old, and okay, he hasn't turned into the great superstar pitcher. But now you're not asking him to be. If you surround a Casey Mize with talent, and you're asking him, you're a 4 or 5 starter, or maybe he ends up in the bullpen, because then there's Jackson Jobe. Jackson Jobe, who pitched a handful of games yesterday. He's 21 years old, and he was a top prospect, a third pick overall in the draft in 2021. And of course, you also have Matt Manning, who pitched pretty well for them in 2023 in about half a season. Didn't pitch much last year, but you have a bunch of pitchers who are all in there, all in the mix. You're not asking Kenta Maeda, Casey Mize, Jackson Jobe, or Matt Manning to be aces. You're asking to fill out the rotation, and some combination of all of them are going to do it. And if we've seen anything about the way that pitching is going on these days, it's that they'll all eventually make some starts. But they also did a couple other things. As I said, they brought in Flaherty. They brought in Cobb. The other day, they brought in Tommy Kahnle. And Tommy Kahnle, who maybe threw one changeup too many, but he pitched very well the last couple of years with the New York Yankees out of the bullpen. And over the last bunch of years, he's been a very effective relief pitcher for the Yankees with playoff experience. Guess what he does? He gives them some bullpen depth. Oh, speaking of the Yankees, in comes Gleyber Torres. Now, Gleyber Torres, who was, by the way, when I mentioned that trade about the Yankees trading away Aroldis Chapman and then re-signing him, Gleyber Torres was the prospect they got back from the Cubs. Now, Torres was a terrific player right out of the gate with the Yankees, an all-star and rookie of the year candidate. He's slowed down, but he's still got a lot of pop. He still has some power in his bat. And, he has some, he's a second baseman, which is where he should be playing. But once again, he's a major leaguer. You fill the spots with major leaguers. I love what the Detroit Tigers are doing. They're taking a look. We have a foundation of a team. We have a team that was good enough to make the playoffs last year, good enough to advance in the playoffs last year. We have a couple of key star players. Now let's start sprinkling some major leaguers in there and take your best shot. Now again, I'm it's a ways till I start making my official picks. But right now, if I'm going to pick an American League Central team, I'm probably going to pick Detroit. I like their depth. And there's the other thing looming. The other player that's looming out there right now, and the other player who you're taking a look at and you go like, someone is still floating out there, and that's Alex Bregman. And Alex Bregman, who got a 6-year offer from the Houston Astros, I don't think he's going to go to the Red Sox. I don't think he's going to go to the Yankees. I don't think he's going to go to the Mets. He probably could go to the Seattle Mariners because the Mariners need another bat. But of course, Bregman, who has played with A.J. Hinch in his days with the Houston Astros, could come in and be yet another solid veteran that you just insert into this lineup. Put him at third base. All of a sudden, you have that big power hitter in there. And maybe, just maybe, bringing in all these veterans could go a long way in saying, hey, that's a place I may want to play. And the other teams in the American League should be following suit. In fact, I'm going to tip my hat to the Seattle Mariners. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not they're going to trade Luis Castillo because they have too many pitchers, of which I say that's impossible. You cannot have too many pitchers. Do what teams that have too many pitchers wind up saying at some point during the regular season? Oh my God, who's going to pitch tomorrow? It's never going to happen. And you know what they did? Do you know what Seattle did? They doubled down. Not only did they not trade Luis Castillo, they acquired another pitcher named Luis Castillo. That's right. They've doubled up on their pitchers named Luis Castillo, which means there's only one thing left to do. Bring the second baseman, Luis Castillo, out of retirement. That's right. If you want to contend, load up on major leaguers and lean on people named Luis Castillo. Sad note today, Rest in peace for Rich Dower. Rich Dower was the starting second baseman for the Baltimore Orioles when they won their last World Series. In fact, played in their last, to date, their last World Series appearance, which was in 1983. Rich Dower, again, one of those types of players who is, not a Hall of Famer, not a superstar, just a hardworking, good, solid player who was a big part of that infield when they won the World Series in 1983, and also when they went to the World Series in 1979 and lost that thriller to the Pittsburgh Pirates. A lot of superstars have played in the Orioles infield over the years, whether it's obviously the great infield they had in the 70s when you had Boog Powell and Davey Johnson, Mark Belanger, and Brooks Robinson. Eventually you had Bobby Grich, who belongs in the Hall of Fame, and Doug DeCinces, who had an incredibly underappreciated career in Baltimore until he was appreciated finally when he was with California. The Hall of Famer Eddie Murray came in there. The Hall of Famer Cal Ripken came in there. And Rich Dower kind of was a linking position for all of them. When he broke in 1976, he was part of an Orioles team where his teammates included Brooks Robinson. His teammates included Bobby Grich and Mark Belanger and Doug DeCinces and Lee May and Paul Blair and Al Bumbry and L. Ron Hendricks. And oddly, Reggie Jackson was on that team too. That was the 1 year he was there. And he wound up playing alongside all of those players and Eddie Murray, and being on the team when Ripken and company wound up winning the World Series. And he went on to be a coach for the Astros team that must not be mentioned in 2017. And he was from San Bernardino, California, and was a first-round draft pick by both the Cleveland Indians and the Baltimore Orioles as a graduate of USC. And so Rich Dower, rest in peace, beloved figure in the history of the Baltimore Orioles. And there's one other big signing. Hae-Sung Kim signed with Tampa Bay. I like this signing a lot for Tampa Bay. Kim is about as good a defensive infielder as you're going to get. He's still pretty young. He can come right in and give the Tampa Bay Rays a lot of depth in terms of their infield defense and in terms of, yet again, put a major leaguer in the lineup and see what happens. All right, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode. I am going to be doing an episode either tomorrow or the next day where I answer some viewer responses, especially about the Ken Burns episode and the Faye Vincent episode. Each got some interesting responses. Talking about Jack Flaherty signing that kind of unusual signing, and the Tigers doing it the way all American League teams should be doing it. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.